If you're new to dehydrating and you wish that somebody was around to share all the tips that made it really successful for them so that you could be more successful at dehydrating for your family, don't worry, I'm here. I'm Darcy from the Purposeful Pantry, your dehydrating BFF. I'm here to share all those tips that I've learned about dehydrating food over the last 20 years to share with you to make your dehydrating journey more enjoyable and successful so that you can put food aside for your family too. And I'm not going to make you wait till the end to get to the biggest tip. I'm going to give that to you right now. The biggest tip for dehydrating foods just like this is to stop paying attention to the timer. Don't pay attention to the time that's in the books or something that you might have heard me say on a video or on my website. Times are relative when it comes to dehydrating. And by that I mean what happens in my home is going to be different than what happens in your home, even if we follow the same steps. Okay? Because there are some things that affect drying time. It's going to be things like the wattage of your machine. When you buy a machine, sometimes when you're new, you buy a machine that's pretty inexpensive because you want to get your feet in and kind of get wet and see what you think about it. And that low wattage means it doesn't have enough power to push hot air fast through it, so it takes longer for those things to dry. So when you see something that says herbs should take anywhere from 4 to 6 hours to dry in your dehydrator, and you're thinking, I put basil in my dehydrator and it's been 10 hours and it's still not dry. Well, there are two issues there. Basil always takes longer, and it's going to take longer for your machine because it just isn't as powerful as the machines they use to test those recipes. And it's okay. If you know that, then you can just let things dry as they're going to dry. Give them the time that they need. There could be things like how you cut your food. If you did thicker slices, then what's the recommended slice size, which is usually about 1/4 of an inch. There are all sorts of reasons that make that drying time different from home to home and situation to situation. When you're going to dry things, don't just pull them off the tray and say, okay, I'm going to test it and it's dry, because that never works. You need to give that food time to cool off first, usually from about 5 to 10 minutes for most foods, then test it. And if it's not dry, then you put it back into your dehydrator. Now, how do you know when things are actually dry? Let me show you. For things like slices of fruits or slices of vegetables, you should be able to just snap, okay? They should snap apart just like that. That should be it. So something to know about oranges, it might completely snap, but what you also need to do is look at the cells on the inside there, and if you're seeing moisture on the inside of that, it's not dry, put it back in. With things like vegetables that are in small little things like this, you want to hear this. You want to hear that plink. You want to hear that sound of the higher plink that goes into this. If you hear something kind of thud and it's not that high pitch, then you know it's probably not done yet and you want to give it some more time. Something else to look for is a dry, leathery surface on most foods. Whether it is corn, whether it is an orange, when you feel it, it shouldn't feel wet or sticky or oily or anything like that. There should be nothing that tells you that there's still some moisture here. Okay, here's another tip I'm going to share with you. And it's something that, especially if you're new to dehydrating, you want to take advantage of this. It's called conditioning. This is a way for you to double check to make sure your food is completely dry before putting it in your pantry and then finding mold in it later, which happens way more often than you think. So what is conditioning? It's taking the container, an airtight container just like this, with whatever the food is you just dried. They need to be cool. Put them in an airtight container. I use canning jars. You may find some other containers that you prefer. And every day, you're gonna just kind of toss them around a little bit. And then you're gonna just let them sit. What you're looking for is things sticking together. But maybe you're talking about, you turn the jar over like this, and you see some things sticking to the top. And you're looking at it and going, well, is that a problem? If you shake it like this, a light shake, and they come off, it's not a problem. If you see things, when you tip it over and you give it a shake and they're not coming off, or you're seeing things clump in the middle of the jar, that's what you're looking for. If you see that, put it back in your dehydrator and give it more time to dry. Because what's happened is the samples that you took might have been dry, but other places in your machine, because not every machine dries evenly across every tray all the time, maybe some of those other pieces weren't quite dry. And so what they're doing now is transferring that moisture around, and things are starting to stick together because they're all collecting that moisture. Now, the one caveat I'm going to give you here is if you're in your jar and you see what is mold, which is white fuzzy stuff on your food. If you find mold in your jar, unfortunately, you have to throw everything out. because that whole wives' tale about scraping off the mold off the top of a jar and putting it right back in doesn't work here, because that mold that is growing here where you can see it is likely also still growing over here where you can't see it yet, and you don't want to ingest that. Now, the next tip I want to share with you is using your dehydrated foods aren't going to be like having fresh. When you rehydrate don't think about those dehydrated foods as being foods that are necessarily good on their own by themselves as a side dish. Typically, most will not have the kind of texture that you want or that you would expect from what you typically cook when you cook from fresh. What they're perfect for is to use as ingredients in the dishes that you already cook. So let's say soup. These are all perfect ingredients for your soups to add in, let them simmer, let them cook, and they're going to make great soups for you. They work the same way with stews. They work that way with maybe casseroles that you make or some stovetop dishes that you do. All of those things that you use a lot of ingredients for already to make, that's what this is going to be perfect for. But think about dehydrated foods best as ingredients in dishes instead of just being on their own as a solo dish. Okay, I'm going to give you a tip now about rehydrating. Now, I'm not going to show you how to rehydrate everything, because basically what you need to do is put that into water or broth, let it simmer, let it heat up, let all of those cells reabsorb all that water. You can do it in a soup pot that's going to simmer for a long time. You can do it in a saucepan on your stovetop. You can put a jar of some of your favorite vegetables into the refrigerator overnight and they will rehydrate. So that's what I'm showing you here. This is some of my favorite soup mix that I make just like this. And I'm putting them into a jar to rehydrate. Once they've rehydrated means they've absorbed all of the water they're going to absorb. You're not done, okay? Rehydrating simply means you've put the water back into the food so that you get things that look sort of like they were when they were fresh, okay? But the problem is they need to cook, because when you dry them, likely they were either completely raw or they were blanched. And so they still need to finish cooking in whatever it is that you're doing. The other thing is they also need to be seasoned, and you need to do those things that you would normally do to every other thing that you cook. Maybe you want to saute them in a little oil or butter, or maybe you want to just add some more seasonings to your dish, like some salt and pepper or whatever the seasonings that you like to add. You're not done at just the rehydrating phase. You also still need to cook them. And that's one of those things that people run into when they start to do things and they go, it just doesn't taste good. And I was like, well, did you allow it to cook? And did you season it? Because that's really helpful. Okay, here's another tip for you. When you got your dehydrator, you probably did not get any kind of sheet to put on here for doing fruit leathers or to keep things from falling through the holes, or maybe yours only came with one and you think that's all you can get. The thing that you want is you want more tray liners. The reason that you want tray liners is that things can shrink and they will fall through the holes, okay? And so you want to help make that easier. Another reason is also because these metal grates on your tray, I don't know if you can see it here, they are not smooth, they are not solid, they have lots of ridges, they have places where foods will start to kind of settle on them and they can stick. So you may have, this is a silicone mesh sheet. They're really inexpensive, can be gotten in larger sizes and cut down to almost any size tray that you have. This is a mesh plastic sheet, just like this, that goes right on there as well. You might have things that are like this that are fruit leather sheets that will work. You can use parchment paper, and some people actually even use cloth, that they put some cloth down here and use it for everything except for fruit leather. So these things will also make it easier if you put your food on this tray. So let's say you just dried some apple bits, and here are apple bits, and you want to take them off the tray. It makes it so easy just to lift it up and use it as a funnel to put it right back into your jar. Just like that. They serve more than one purpose. And here is one of those practical things that I'm going to share with you. Everything, pretty much everything in the world, can be dehydrated, but not everything should be dehydrated. Those things that are high in fats can be dehydrated in most cases. Some things are not recommended to be dehydrated because of the time that they're sitting on the trays in temperatures that may not be optimal to stop salmonella issues or other bacterial issues are problematic. So the National Center for Home Food Preservation says that eggs, raw eggs, shouldn't be dried in a dehydrator because the temperature kind of cycles some, and so it doesn't necessarily stay at a good temperature the entire time. Now, I'm going to say this, those of you who raise your own eggs and decide to dehydrate your own eggs, You do you. I'm going to teach the safe, practical things up front. You choose what to do at home. Avocados are just pretty much full fat. And if you try to dry them, not only do they turn really dark, even if you treat them with some lemon juice ahead of time, and they just taste bad. Okay, and they're not going to be shelf stable. You're still going to have to store them in the freezer, but they just taste awful. They're just not good. Freezing is a better option, and I'll give you a resource for that here, but that's something that you should do instead, because freezing will keep them in your freezer. They will taste so much better than if you try to dry them, because ugh. Meat also are one of those things that is really hard for people to wrap their heads around, about the fact that yes, you can dry meat, but there are some issues. If you're not curing that meat, over time it can turn bad, and it will not be something that you want to have. It's not reliably shelf stable because of that. Also, a lot of meats have fat in the fibers. They may not have big chunks of fat, but you still have fat in meat. And if you don't get all that fat out, it can make your meat not reliably shelf stable, because that fat could turn rancid over time. So it's recommended that you store it in your freezer until you need it for either a meal in a jar that you might keep on the shelf for a little while. Whether you're going hiking and camping, you can take it out, go on your trip, enjoy your food. That's fine. Short-term use like that is almost always fine. So if you really want shelf-stable meats, freeze dry it or can it for optimal shelf stability. Now, here's another tip. This is going to be controversial across the board, I'm sure. To seal or not to seal, that is the question. When you're talking about dehydrated foods, if you keep your food in a jar that's the right size for this, now with this amount of celery I have, I should probably put this in a 1/2 pint jar, not this pint jar, because you want to use a container that's the same volume as the food that you have in it. Now, what do you do then? You want it into an airtight container, anything that is airtight. Whether you use a canning jar, a spaghetti jar, any of the kind of glass jars that you can get from the grocery store that have food in it, whether you use Mylar bags, it does not matter. Use something that is airtight, because that means no new air can get introduced into the jar. So what you're looking at is no new moisture gets introduced into here. You're only dealing with what's in the jar. And in most cases, this is fine. You do not need to ever do anything more than this. And what it does is it gives you a little assurance that your food is actually vacuum sealed and there's nothing else being introduced into it. I do not use O2 absorbers on any of my dehydrated foods. I hate using them. They're a pain, and they can be hard to manage. If you don't do them correctly, you waste them all, and it's not worth it. A vacuum seal machine works the exact same way. And this is what you can do. You can just put your lid on and go. And this will vacuum seal this jar to take all of the air out of it, so that you don't have to worry about the little bit of moisture or oxygen that is inside of your jar. I will leave a video right here that shows you all of the different ways that you can vacuum seal a jar. This is something that is not mandatory, it's not necessarily, but can be helpful. That's up to you to do if you'd like to do. And then I can store this just like this. If I open this jar, get some celery out and put it back, I can always, with this little handheld, really quickly vacuum seal again. And if you want to see one of the ways that I use my dehydrated foods to make this awesome dessert, watch this video right here. And be sure to ask any questions that you have down in the comments below. I'll be happy to answer all of them. And I'll leave all of the resources in the description box below. And until I see you again next time, happy dehydrating and keep preserving.